first there was so much talk on the origins of microbes, that microbes can come from our hands, microbes can come from ants, microbes come from the soil or fungi. At least fungi are everywhere, actually. But what about evolution? How is evolution important to understand that story and putting it together? And I wonder if the evolutionary biologists in the room could tell us why is evolution important to thinking about holobionts or holobionts in food systems?
We have 15 minutes, is it? No, but yeah, I think that's a very fundamental question, Veronica. Right? I don't think the microbes think about it in terms of being sourced from somewhere. I mean, I think they've been here all along. We were just briefly passing by. They were the first, they will be the last to be here. So I think the evolutionary perspective is the focus on the host, and then how we only exist at the mercy of the microbes around us, and that we only function together with them. I'm just thinking out loud. It's a fundamental question, but I think I would flip the perspective.
Yeah, I think, but does anyone else have a different perspective? Because there's been a lot of this conversation that is the small that influence the large, or the large that influence the small, the microbe to the host, or the host to the microbe. And I guess your answer, Morten, is that the microbes are really maybe running the show, and we're passing by.
I mean, if I could chime in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You're on.
I think there's something to be said about the loopiness, as Josh's lovely emoji illustration. I mean, I just had one little liver fluke life cycle, but I think what we kind of get at in all of this is that there are these profound interplays between, if we want to talk about, an evolutionary perspective here, there are these profound interplays between organisms, both in genomes and in environments and in life cycles and in cultural habits that kind of fold back on each other like puff pastry. They kind of wrap up and entangle and stretch out and shrink back down again. And I think from an evolutionary perspective, when we think about microbes, and I wrote in the Noma Guide, it's a microbes world, we're just living in it, I completely agree, but we also have to remember that they collaborate and compete with each other. That there was, if we want to talk about anything, there was Luca. There was just one last universal common ancestor somewhere back in time. And she might have had her own loop. She might have offshot kin that came back into her own cells, or snippets of peptides and DNA and plasmids that she reabsorbed into her body. But I think the loopiness is kind of at the core of this kind of interesting web entanglement of connectivity. And when you break down, it's easy for us to talk about microbes as some sort of monolithic structure, but they are the ultimate source of diversity, as Leonie so adequately kind of elucidated. And they fight and collaborate with each other too.
Yeah.
If I may add on to that, I think it's also important to think of the origin of eukaryotes, so all higher organisms which come only into existence through different microorganisms actually collaborating and forming a symbiosis. So some parts of our cells are directly coming from microorganisms, and we have them in all of our cells and all of our bodies, and all animals and all plants do, and all fungi. So I think that also should illustrate how much we are shaped through microorganisms and how much they actually control, one could say, our life and our evolution, and that we all only evolve in a embedded system of other microorganisms.
Can I say something too?
Yeah. And then we'll ask the audience if they have some stuff to say. Huh?
Cool. So I'm so glad you asked about evolution, because I didn't really talk so much about evolution, but I think about it a lot also, and comes into this work in different ways. So in the mesos, for example, we also found that there are niches where there are microbes there, emerging there, that maybe are unique to science, emerging in these niches, evolving as new species by adapting to these niches. So that's going to be the rule rather than the exception. Like all of these fermented foods, as they're being made and remade and refined and further diversified, like Leonie was talking about, that is also opening up new niches where new forms of life can emerge. So that's one thing I think about is sort of the paths of evolution, right? But evolution, of course, is also always an ongoing process. It's always happening all the time and will continue to happen. And harnessing that is also super exciting. So like in the plant cheese stuff that we're doing, essentially a big part of that is also directed evolution studies. So part of it is the community assembly coalescence I was talking about, but another part of it is seeing how, others like Leonie and other people in the room are working on this. How can we set things up to try to encourage certain microbes to evolve, either in directions that we want them to go, which is fine, or in directions that we can't even imagine, but they will decide and reveal to us. And I personally find that even more exciting, both from a fundamental science point of view, also because maybe there can be new flavors, new diversity, new experiences that we can never even imagine or design ourselves, that the microbes are just waiting to show us if we learn to listen. So,
Yeah.
evolution.
Evolution, yeah. You see that this word is really broad, right? When I think about evolution, I ask, well, how did the ant evolve with the bacteria, right? Because before it's in our yogurt, it was in the ant. And it evolved because it's an acidic environment, and the ants eat a lot of sugar. And then once it got into the yogurt or got into this microbe is in some of our food we eat every day, actually, then how did it evolve then in the yogurt environment? And why was the environment in the ant important to the yogurt? And then that microbe will probably be around long after I'm here, and maybe even many of the ants it was originally in. So, we would love to hear if you have some questions for the panel, be them big or small. What is your favorite microbe? Some might have an answer, some may say diversity. But if you do have a question, please raise your hands on either side. We have Christina and Ella, and they will bring a microphone to you, and that way we can record it, because this session, everyone on stage, is being recorded so that the evening is open access afterwards. So just be aware that if you decide to volunteer your voice, it will be recorded and put on YouTube for all of eternity. No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, for eternity. Firstly, thank you all for some very interesting input. Some of you are clearly focused on very academic research, and some of you are working commercially. So my question is, if you take the great Danish public or the great English public or the great American public and what they're buying in supermarkets, which is where most people buy most of their food, where would you guys expect what you're talking about today to have manifested itself in what I can buy in a supermarket in 10 or 20 years' time? Where will I see products that are a result of your work? How much breakthrough do you think the things you're working with and would like to see greater numbers of people eating and cooking with? Because I'm from England, but I've lived in Denmark a long time. I think that the Danish supermarkets, and please forgive me the Danes here, because I'm going to get lynched probably, but I think that the Danish supermarkets are extraordinarily conservative. Just looking at their tilbudsavis, to me, look like the same as they did in the 1970s. And if you take, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all, but the majority of Danish people's eating habits to me is really quite conservative. And the supermarkets, in my opinion, do almost nothing to promote diversity in product availability. So all your fine work will unfortunately get us nowhere if Superbrugsen and 365, or whatever they're called now, still continue to sell leverpostej and salami and a few tomatoes from some Danish gardenery. So what products do you expect to see come as a result of all your work and focuses? Thank you.
Yeah. Leonie, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And then Morten, I might come to you and ask you a question down there. So please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that actually maybe the main contribution of our work is actually education, so that the consumers actually change their ideas and behavior and demand different products, because the supermarkets, they will only cater to their consumers, right? So they only sell things that are being sold. And therefore, we need to kind of use opportunities like this to talk to the public and actually engage in a public discussion and conversation in order to popularize the idea and the benefits of maybe diversity in fermented foods, or maybe also spark interest in trying to do like ferments at home and educating about fermentation as many people here do. So I think that is, at least for me, the most plausible and important route that we should take.
Morten, we were having a coffee the other day, and you told me this crazy fact that 50% of the vertebrates on Earth, so anything with a spine, right? So 50% of the vertebrates on Earth are fish. What? Like, wow.
Citation.
So, can you ask that question about thinking about 50% of the vertebrates about your fish, and how does that tie into the food system or the supermarket or fish holobionts?
Yeah, so given that fact, and the whole field of aquaculture is so much younger than traditional agriculture, though I'd like to keep my leverpostej, though I don't mind increased diversity. So of all the traditional meat species, it's pretty conservative. You can count them on one hand. But I think the number of fish species that we will see hopefully will increase, because there's such a huge potential, but also less knowledge. But just on your question, I saw a very short feel-good video on LinkedIn the other day with René Redzepi, but I think he was wowed about some people, entrepreneurs like you guys, who made a really delicious pasta out of food waste, scraps, right? So I think all of the boring traditional food today, where 1/3 of or 1/5 of it is ending in the trash bin, I think you'll see that being fermented into something delicious, and then instead of being waste, will end it up as a delicious meal.
Great, thank you, Morten. I want to see, are there any other questions in the audience? Yeah.
It's just a follow-up on education. I myself am a teacher, and I've taught cooking as well. Do you guys have any working relationship with the Danish school system? Like, there's one called Go Cook, for instance, where you can have chefs out. I've had someone serve insects, for instance, for some of the students. But do you have any on fermentation?
I do not. I do. I'm sure I've lectured and done workshops at different schools. None in Denmark, I don't think. But maybe the most notable is like the University of Gastronomic Science. I've taught there a few times.
What were you teaching again? Primary school?
Yes, primary.
Okay, yeah. So actually, we just made a collaboration with Alinea. So there is an online session now on hologenomics in general. So it also starts with evolution stuff, but there's also some applied stuff. So on Alinea, you can find it called hologenomics, right, Christina?
And it's also, if you go to that link, you can find it on our webpage.
There's also the microbial literacy consortium. They provide teaching materials, and there, for example, I've also submitted 2 different teaching materials, and they have a number of materials covering all sorts and different aspects of microbiology that I think might be relevant for teaching.
Yeah, like David, most of the education stuff I do tends to be for like slightly higher ages, so like usually bachelors and above. But I think for me, I'm more involved in like conversations with other educators who then do it. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, I can also recommend checking out a lot of the citizen science work that Rob Dunn's lab and collaborators do. A lot of it actually has been in collaboration with CEH and the Natural History Museum here. And there's multiple really large-scale experiments involving like across Denmark primary school students. You might know about some of it already, but there's some really cool work to check out there.
Yeah. So we have one more question from the audience, and then we'll start to wrap up.
All right. Thank you for all your talks. They were really stimulating. Mine is not so much a question, but a topic that I would love to hear anyone or all of you kind of touch upon. And it was a thread that I kind of noticed in each of your presentations. And that was the more personal side that you take in relating to your work, and this concept of relationality, I suppose. And I don't know, this is something that David has given me his 2 cents on, but collaboration. And I'm interested in how you personally relate to what you're studying, and this relationship you form with the organisms in a sense. And in a broader concept, I mean, this is getting a bit rambly, but wherever you want to take this, I think would be valuable. But in a broader concept, how seeing the living world in a more humble sense can work at scale, I suppose, because I think that a lot of these talks have been getting toward different ways of thinking about food systems, and if we are taking a more reciprocal approach to what we're studying, how that can potentially be beneficial in the future. So wherever that leads.
I'll just recap what I told Taylor. Were we hanging out in the park when we talked about this? I think so. Taylor met me at a cafe and thought the book I was reading was cool, and so she introduced herself. It was a Nick Lane book about oxygen. In terms of the collaboration, I think it's like a fun buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but I think we also have to check ourselves a little bit and understand that when, as a fermenter or a microbiologist, you set up a series of experiments or a series of parameters and then allow the microbes to take the wheel after that, it is artifice. I mean, by definition, it is you decide. You get to decide, and if it goes wrong, you get to throw it out. You know what I mean? If something unexpected crops up, and I hear Josh talk about, the opportunities for surprise that pop out of fermentation, but if something pops up that your health and safety department decides shouldn't be eating, well, there goes that experiment too. That definitely happened to me sometimes at NOMA. So I think that it is nice to talk about collaboration and to put on our happy face and say that we're working with these microbes, but we are, as I mentioned to you, Taylor, the boundary conditions. We become like the hard stop of the environment, where if something doesn't go according to plans, we get to wipe it all clean and start over. So it is. I mean, that leads. I'll let someone comment on the second half of your kind of volley there, but it leads into notions of reciprocity and what that really means, because we allow these organisms to work with us, and we allow ourselves to explore their possibilities insofar as they serve human flourishing, I guess. And we've excluded them for a long time because we've mistakenly thought that they negate our well-being. And now we kind of realize that their absence is as much as a problem as their presence in certain instances. But yeah, I think that collaboration comes with an asterisk.
If I may.
Yeah.
I might jump in on sort of another part of what you mentioned, just to divide labor a little bit and all that. You mentioned the word relationality, and so forgive me in advance if this becomes like too theoretical, because that's also another part of my work which I tried to not expose you to in this talk. But I feel like you've given me permission. So relationality is understood in a lot of different ways. I think I want to talk about it really briefly, just because I think for me it's maybe a good answer to the problem that we've all in different ways been circling around when it comes to holobionts, of like, what is the right, best way to conceptualize them? Or is there even one right, best way to do that? Is it like an individual with an appendage that's the microbiome? Is the individual the unit of those things? Is there any individual at all? This is essentially for philosophy. I don't know if science alone, and it's not to denigrate science or anything. I think it's the sort of question that like is maybe more about the process of trying to work out than ever being able to fully arrive at any perfectly clear answer. And why I think relationality is maybe one really good way to try to address that problem is because if we understand it in kind of a strong way, so there's a kind of weak way to understand it, right? Which is sort of like the world is made up of things and individuals, and they're related to each other, and that's relationality. But I think there's a stronger, maybe more radical, maybe more interesting way to understand it, which is that the world is actually made up of relationships. And the extent to which we think and seem to perceive that it's actually made up of individuals and things is a result of relationships. That's a kind of effect that comes after. And again, that maybe is kind of unintuitive, especially for the natural sciences, which for their history have tried to convince us that that's not how the world is. They've been very successful. I myself am implicated in that. But that's a very old idea also. Like a lot of indigenous knowledge, for example, understands the world in this way. A lot of other kinds of traditional knowledge understand the world in this way. When we come to holobionts, all of a sudden, that actually starts to make a lot of sense. Because also, not in just a kind of up here philosophical way, in a very concrete scientific way, if we start to understand holobionts that way, as first and foremost being made up of relationships, and then only after seeming to appear to be made up of individuals interacting, all of a sudden, actually the science becomes a lot easier to do and makes a lot more sense. And suddenly the data actually starts to make a lot more sense. For me, that's another thing that's like super exciting and engaging about trying to do science with holobionts and trying to use that holobionic science to think about holobionts in a maybe different, better, slightly more nuanced, relational way. So thank you for your question and for giving me the excuse to, pontificate a little bit about it.
Thank you. Thank you for that last question. Do you have any last thoughts here? I think that was great.
I should just very briefly add it.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of this research field is that it's probably the field that I can think of that is where such a short distance from the very, very fundamental evolutionary thinking to the everyday appliedness of what we do. And another, I think, asset in terms of relationship in a more literal meaning of the word is that I basically can study the same questions that I've done throughout my career, but now I just have a new framework, and I can easily merge into new research fields and arenas. So the number of relationships will only increase in my work life. So.
Yes. So, thank you for your thoughts. I encourage you all to go home and think about your relationships. How is the yogurt in the morning make you feel, but actually the yogurt in the morning stimulates your whole gut microbiome, and maybe that makes you healthier. Or what about the relationships of the ant you see on the sidewalk that maybe made your yogurt, or the relationships of the people in your life and what you learn from them along the way. Like, a lot of our research is inspired by stories and collaboration and paying attention to little things. Thank you all so much for coming to the event, for tasting, for listening and sharing. Get home safe, and please reach out to the center. You can find out more if you can scan this QR code, and we look forward to the next event with you guys. Thank you.